So they will arrive when they do. But I want to begin by welcoming everyone. I'm Shuli Passo. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at B'nai Jeshurun. And it's really heartening and wonderful to see so many people here tonight, part of this learning experience, and so many different communities that have come together pretty quickly to put together this educational forum on homelessness in New York City. We're really glad to be partnering with so many Jewish institutions on the Upper West Side, including SAJ, Judaism That Stands for All, Romamu, the Jewish Center, the Joseph Stern Center for Social Responsibility at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, Base Hillel, Darchei Noam, Anshe Chesed. I think I got everyone. And so glad to be having this conversation with so many people from so many different communities in this neighborhood. It's not often that that happens. And it's a really important and timely topic that I think, in addition to everything that's been going on in the world, this has been a very, locally on our hearts and on our minds. And I really just want to frame the conversation before we jump in, by offering an insight really from the wisdom of the Hebrew language, which is that the Hebrew word for neighborhood, shchuna, derives from the same root as the Hebrew, one of the names of God, Shekhinah. And I mean, Hebrew's just so wise in the ways that words are connected through their etymology and their common roots. And it suggests to us that in our neighborhoods, we want to experience a sense of the Shekhinah's presence, of divinity. And it's not always easy to achieve that. There have been controversies and challenges in this neighborhood over the course of the past several months, and certainly in past years as well. But I think the question that we're asking through the conversation tonight and beyond is, how do we create a neighborhood where there is a shchuna, a neighborhood where there is shekhinah, divine presence, in all of the ways that we would hope for that to be manifested. And it's complicated and it's nuanced, and we want to unpack that a little bit through tonight's forum. And we hope to have some follow up conversations and forums as well, to move beyond the polarization and the headlines and some of the rhetoric, and to move into a more of an understanding of this issue. So tonight we're not really going to be focusing much on this particular situation on the Upper West Side, but more pulling back and looking at the bigger context, the bigger picture of homelessness in New York City in recent years, in past years. And I'm very, very pleased to turn it over right now to Steve Capelle, who is the first vice president of BJ on our board of trustees, and who really helped put together tonight's panel to introduce our panelists, and then we'll begin the program. Because we have chat, we'll see if we'll try to answer questions as you put them in the chat, and you'll see that you should be able to chat directly to the hosts, but not to everyone. So if you have a question at any point, please feel free to put that in the chat, and we'll try to incorporate that into the conversation. And if we don't get to it, we'll have some time at the end for additional questions. So thank you again for being here. Thank you to all of our partners who co-sponsored the planning team, Rabbi Lauren Grabel Herman from SAJ, and Steve, Vicki Abrams, who's a BJ member and on the board of the JCC, Cheryl Parker, and Ruth Messenger from the Stern Center for Social Responsibility. Stephen, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Shuli. In addition to being an officer at BJ, and for full disclosure, I'm also the chairman of the board of the Doe Fund. And you'll be meeting one of our star workers and also co-board members in just a minute. And I'm fortunate to be able to say that I've had the chance to work with both of our panelists extensively, and we could not be more fortunate to have such knowledgeable and committed panelists to help contextualize the issue of homelessness and its history in New York City. So first, Muzzy Rosenblatt. Muzzy is the CEO and president of the Bowery Residence Committee. BRC's 30 programs with nearly 3,000 units of shelter and housing provide an integrated continuum of comprehensive services to the over 10,000 housed and unhoused individuals it annually serves, offering a caring and effective path from homelessness to home. Under Muzzy's leadership, BRC was the 2015 winner of the New York Nonprofit Excellence Awards, a 2016 national finalist for the Drucker Prize, and a 2019 winner of the Urban Land Institute's New York's Award for Excellence in Development for an amazing project, by the way, that I also had the chance to work with Muzzy on, and maybe he'll describe actually a new continuum for how folks can get from temporary shelter to permanent housing. Prior to Muzzy being the CEO at BRC, he held several positions in the New York City government, including being the first deputy mayor, that would be the next administration, the first deputy commissioner and acting commissioner from the New York City Department of Homeless Services. We're also happy to have Nazarene Griffin with us. Naz is the facility director of the Peter J. Sharp Center for Opportunity at the Doe Fund, which is a 400-bed facility in Brooklyn. His 25-year career with the Doe Fund has seen him rise from a trainee to serving with me on the Doe Fund's board of directors. Naz has also managed a transitional housing facility for the Doe Fund in Harlem and overseen the regional replications of the Ready, Willing, and Able program that the Doe Fund runs in both Philadelphia and Atlanta. In 2017, Naz was named New York One's New Yorker of the Week, and last year won the Citizens Against Recidivism Award for his work with the Doe Fund. And before passing this over to our moderator, Sophie House, I'd like to finally introduce her as well. Sophie is a legal fellow at the NYU Herman Center, which until her appointment as a deputy mayor, today's deputy mayor, was run by our BJ member, Vicky Bean. Sophie's work focuses on how cities approach issues relating to housing, homelessness, and the use of public space. She's a graduate of Yale Law School, holds a BA in economics from NYU, and a master's in comparative social policy from Oxford. Before joining the NYU Herman Center, she served as a law clerk to the Honorable Andrew D. Hurwitz of the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in Arizona. Sophie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you to Shuli and all of our organizers and sponsors. This is a really exciting conversation. I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and it's really an honor to be here with Muzzy and with Nazarene. I consider it both a special privilege and a really vital part of any sort of critically reflective conversation about homelessness, to have someone in this conversation who has a lived experience of homelessness. So I think there is going to be no better place for us to start tonight than Nazarene, by having you share some of your story with us. So yeah, really, I know you've had the chance to talk about your journey to, and then ultimately through homelessness many times before. I think we'd just love to hear it wherever you'd like to start. Great.
Unmute myself. Okay.
You're unmuted.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah. All right.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nazarene Griffin, and I am currently the facility director at the Doe Fund. And to tell you a little bit about myself, I am formerly homeless. My story is one of not that unusual than most of the people that you might be seeing on the street. After about, I say about 28 years of using drugs, I found myself homeless, living on the streets of New York in 1994. I was addicted to about 3 or 4 drugs and I was dying. The only thing I knew to do was go to a hospital. That was the only thing to save my life. Once I got there, I found out that I could be detoxed and they could teach me how to stay, learn a different way to live. I learned that through the 12-step programs. However, that's only part of the journey. After you get clean and you're sober, you need a connection back into mainstream. So I ended up in a shelter. This particular shelter, although I was grateful for being in it, didn't provide a whole lot of services. Just a few meals and a cot. And after you come off drugs for a while and your mind starts to come back and you clear up, you realize where you are. You realize that you are being warehoused, for lack of a better terminology. I knew I was kind of like stuck where I was, and I began searching for services. How could I get out of this dilemma I caused for myself? I was fortunate in 1995, there wasn't a whole lot of services out there for single able-bodied men. There still isn't enough services out there for single able-bodied men to re-enter society, to try to get back to society. So for me, I was fortunate to find at the time the only doe fund there was. And I was entered there and I was able to begin to get my life back. The doe fund's model is work works. And so I was able to get a job, work for them until I got a job on the outside. I think it's real important that people know that a lot of homeless people like myself want to work. We just lack the opportunity to work. And so while I was searching, I was real fortunate to find the doe fund, because a lot of places don't provide that opportunity. So my life hasn't been the same since then. I decided to devote my life to be of service to others. And that's how I've been living my life for the last 26 years. People don't have the opportunity to get a second chance. Second chances are real important. Do-overs in life are real important. And for me, being treated like a human being was key and real important to me when I first started this road back. It was just the hope that was given to me was important. So, that's where I'm at today. Today, I'm just I come to work every day to help show other men. I think it's examples are real important. People need to see examples of people that have come through the trenches and the hard times, the snakes and the snares, So I'm actual living proof for a lot of men, and I sell hope every day. I'm probably the biggest hope salesman the doe fund has. I operate the largest probably shelter in the city shelter, 400 men. I think it's important to develop culture. It's a positive peer pressure culture here. And that's where I'm at now. I mean, I've been fortunate to live 2 lives in one lifetime. I have a beautiful family, daughter. Those were things that I never thought I could get, that I had lost. and never thought I could get a second chance at it. So I think it's important when we look at homeless people that we know that they're not that much different than us, than any of us. Um, and it's connecting them to the right services. If they don't have an opportunity to get out of the situation they're in, then it'll be like I was, warehoused. They're just being warehoused.
Naz, I wanted to follow up on a couple of points, and thank you for sharing that. It's a really I think poignant way for us to start out when when you talk about everything that's been restored to you, or what the life that you've been able to live on your second chance. And I think it helps really to remind us what's at stake, in the when we think about this as a crisis, a homelessness crisis in our city, in our neighborhood. And I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you said. First, I thought it was interesting that you point out the service gap for, for sort of single, working age men, single able-bodied men. And I wanted to also just unpack the idea a little bit more. That's kind of core to your to what you do at the Doe Fund. You say, so the Doe Fund sort of operates from a principle that that work works, and you're drawing our attention to one misconception, right, that a lot of people have about people who are experiencing homelessness, and you point out that in fact, actually, lots of people would really like to work, and that there's a gap there. So I wonder if you can, in a minute, just help sort of walk us through all of the all of the obstacles or all the challenges that maybe stand between someone who is who is who's experiencing homelessness, either on the streets or in a shelter, and ultimately starting that job, right? I mean, a couple of things that I think we can drum up a couple. Most of us, most people when they're looking for jobs, having having a phone number, a permanent address, a resume, showing up, freshly dressed, showered, all those things. Having, we can think of some intersections with the criminal, having a criminal, past criminal legal system involvement that stand in the way. But can you sort of just talk us through those challenges a little bit?
Sure. I mean, first and foremost, you have to have a relatively safe place to live, where you can call home, whatever space it is. An opportunity to work on your resume, retrieve documents. So many of us had lost our documents. When you're using and you're caught in the grips of the disease of addiction, things like identification are actually no use to you. In fact, you'd rather have no ID on you. When you become sober-minded, then the first thing you want to try to do is get your identification and papers back. And so you have to have some place where you can get your mail, where you can retrieve some of these things, and of course, provide the opportunity to work. And between that time, develop your soft skills. Interviewing, mock interviewing helps a lot. Socializing and re-socialization is key. And that's why this environment was good for me, only because the people that were working there treated me like a person. And so I could get restored. I think to be treated with dignity. I mean, the founders of the organization that I lucked into treated people like people, and that's key. If we treat people like people, they respond. People just generally do, and they can tell when you're treating them like that in a decent manner. So those things were key for me, and I think they're key. They're still key for the guys in our program now, or in the shelter, any shelter where you go if you're treated like that. Where you can begin to rebuild your life or recreate your life. Those things are essential. A clean place to stay, and then I guess and a second chance. You know, like I said, depending on what organization where you're working. Like I said, it's not the same for everybody. Like I said, the services, there's a wide range of services that the city needs to provide. Housing is really short. You know, even if you are able to secure that job and get yourself back into the mainstream, then where do you go to live? Where's an affordable? So many men are in the shelter longer than they want to be, even in my facility. So I'm sure in the other facilities it's just like that too. There's not enough affordable housing available for them to move out. You know, people don't want to live in shelters. You know, that's what they're have to do. So.
Something else. So I was going to ask you a little bit more about the, you know, the services and programs that, you know, really make a difference, you know, made a difference for you, make a difference for the men that you work with now. But I'm hearing you too bring up something that I think is worth exploring. And, you know, so you when you talk about your experience, use a lot of this language of, you know, having, you know, and on a sort of a second go round, having really lucked into, you know, a set of services and a bundle, you know, and a culture that, you know, you needed in order to thrive. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to, you know, it sounds like right now there isn't, you know, sort of uniformly, or even, you know, most of the, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it sounds like you're saying that not just the content of the services or programs, but the way that those services and programs and shelters are currently provided in the city, you know, is not always helping people within those, you know, is not always helping people, you know, sort of achieve their growth and personal betterment and all that. So where would you say we are now? You know, what are some of the issues just within the kind of culture of service provision, and where do we, you know, where would you like to see that system evolve? You know, how can that system improve? Where should it be heading?
Well, let's not be confused. I'm a soldier in this fight. You know, I work hard every day. I mean, I think Muzzy could probably speak more to that particular question. I am not an expert on the different modalities and the different amount of services throughout the city. I know there are services available. I don't think there's enough. My personal experience, I don't think there's enough services available for the different types of populations that we're serving. I find myself sometimes serving populations just out of a need that I'm not really specially trained to do. There are a lot of mentally ill that are just lumped together with the other men. But like I said, to speak more about the delivery of services and what our city would need, I'm not the expert to talk about that. Like I said, someone like Muzzy, who's been doing it for much longer than me, could speak to that.
Sure. Well, yeah, we'll circle back and ask Muzzy about that too. Or Muzzy, do you want to come in if you have any thoughts on that now? Muzzy, why don't you just come in? You're here.
Sure. Yeah. No, hi. Happen to be dropping by. So happy to chime in, and thank you all. I'm the long list of so many institutions and familiar and unfamiliar faces. I feel very much at home. I'm wondering who was left out of this gathering, because it seems like everybody's here, and I think that is wonderful community coming together. I also appreciate Nazarene acknowledging that he is much younger than me, and take that. I'll try and share the wisdom of.
We just wanted to make sure everybody knew.
Yes, no, it's good. So, and thank you, Naz, for sharing. I mean, I've heard the story before, but every time I hear you speak, I'm inspired. because I think just the fact that you are living your second life, as you said, and didn't let the adversity of chapter 1 dictate or define you to yourself, yet alone allow others to define you, but that you took control of your own destiny and chose to write another chapter. And hopefully there are more wonderful chapters to follow. And that is, not only is your story inspiring, but it is stories like Naz's that inspire me every day, and that keep me coming back. I'm here at BRC for 20 years and doing this work, including my time at the city for over 30, both because the situation and the need is great, and it always has been. Homelessness is a crisis for those experiencing it, and it gets resolved. And Naz is living proof of that, and he is no exception. He is an exceptional person, but it's very representative of what happens every day in this city. But the history of homelessness in our city and in our country and around the world is really been going on in different shapes and forms for decades, with different causes, no doubt. And those vary and those evolve, and we are in a particular moment of great pain and suffering, but also great hope because of that transformation. And I think Naz hit the nail on the head when I talk about BRC, including every other week when new employees are onboarded here. I say, if you remember one thing about the work we do and our mission, and that is true, I think, of many, but not all, as Naz indicated. We are here to give people and to afford people and to create, really, in some ways in the same spirit that Shirley was talking about it, a place of opportunity, a community of opportunity for people to achieve their potential. And what one person's potential is versus another is obviously their own journey, their own self, their own identity. But too often, too many either don't have that opportunity because not all shelters are the same, sadly. And because not always are people given that motivation or find that inspiration in themselves to succeed. So that's what we try to do. And that takes, as Naz was beginning to say, a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of services. I go to sleep every night an idealist. I wake up every morning a pragmatist in order to keep moving forward. So I have these kind of idealistic, aspirational goals that we live in a world without poverty, without suffering, without disease, without homelessness. That's the dream I have. But the work I do recognize is that we haven't achieved that dream or come anywhere close to it. So sadly, but necessarily, we have to have places where people can go to heal. Just in the same way we need hospitals. Nobody, I think, I hope, wants anyone to suffer or have disease. And many of us know the things we should be doing. I'm not going to give you a profile. To eat better and exercise more, to reduce the risk of sickness and bad health. And some of us, some of you perhaps do better than me. But even those of us who try really hard never know what could come. And obviously we're living in an extraordinary health crisis that none of us caused, and many have suffered. And many of us know those who have. And so we need places to go for people to heal. And whether it's healing from a physical ailment and a hospital, or it's healing from a social ailment and a shelter, we need to have those places for transformation. Those places where people come in and heal and then leave. I saw, I think in some of the introductory material, that as many people have heard, there on any given night, close to 60,000 people living in a city shelter, single adults, adult families, and families with children. But that's one night. Over the course of a year, it's 2 to 3 times as many people. And so on one level, that's an even more staggering number. But on the other hand, what that larger number tells us relative to the number of beds that we have is that people do move through. People do get help, and people do succeed and move from homelessness to home, as Naz and so many others have. And so it takes, Sophie, those services and understanding and calibrating it for each person, many who are struggling economically. And even if they have a job, right? Even pre-pandemic, when New York City was at its lowest level in unemployment, we still had homelessness high because what people make and what it costs to live in this city are extraordinary, and the number of people, and the Herman Center where Sophie works has done great work on this, of the number, so she'll speak to it probably better than I, of the number of households who are extremely rent burdened, which means that they're actually paying rent, but using half their income just to avoid homelessness, to stay where they are. And so once you're in homelessness, the ability to find an affordable place is impossible, or looking for a needle in the haystack. And then we also have, as Naz touched upon, the crisis of mental illness and addiction, and that has gotten worse in this city, in this country, and around the world, particularly during the pandemic, and our need to understand what people need to recover from those challenges. So let me take a pause there, because I'm probably rambling all over the place, Sophie, and help get us back on track.
Hardly. I think there are some really interesting questions there for us to get into, and I think one piece of groundwork that it might be useful for us to lay, Muzzy, before we do, is around what is referred to as New York City's right to shelter, and as you know, and I know this is
Sure.
one of the reasons that the city's shelter, this right to shelter, which is governed by a consent decree, is one of the reasons that the city's shelter system and the landscape of homelessness more broadly in the city look the way it does. And I think, it's not actually so widely understood. So maybe you can start us off just by talking about how that came, how that
Sure.
Consent decree came to be, and then what happened and how it affects our homelessness landscape today.
So New York City for a long time was the only city in the country, now one of three, where there is this effective right to shelter, where if somebody has no place to go, they can come to the government and say, I need a place to stay, and the government needs to provide that immediately. Similarly to a right to a public education, any child who wants it can get educated. So we don't have a right to housing, but we do have a right to shelter. We have about the same amount of homelessness in New York City as, say, Los Angeles. In New York City, 90% of those who are experiencing homelessness are in a shelter, and about 10% are living unsheltered. And in Los Angeles, if you've been there pre-pandemic, it's heartbreaking, because it's the opposite: 50 to 60,000 people living unsheltered on the streets, parks, along the highways of LA. And the origins of that in New York are that our Constitution was modified after the Depression, when we had Hoovervilles in Central Park, and obviously a lot of suffering everywhere. And the Constitution was modified to say, I'm paraphrasing, but effectively these are the words, that it is the obligation of the state, and the city, of course, is just an extension of the state, it is the obligation of the state to provide for the care of the needy. Very broad, very vague, non-specific. In the late 70s, Hugh Carey was governor, Ed Koch was mayor, and a guy named Bob Hayes was more or less where Sophie is today. I think he probably didn't even have his law degree yet. And he had been given a pro bono case for a bunch of individuals who were trying to get services from the city and were being denied and turned away. And that's when he found the clause. And he brought a lawsuit against the state and the city called Callahan v. Carey, that basically said that the state was not fulfilling its responsibility. The case was never litigated. The facts were so clear that the state and the city said uncle and entered into a consent decree that said that the state and the city would ensure that there is an effective right to shelter. And the way that's translated, that I think kind of weaves into, I think, the experiences so many of us are having right now, is that that right has basically been interpreted for all intents and purposes as an unconditional right, which means that the services that we've been talking about, that many shelters, but not all shelters, provide, are there, but they're voluntary. So the shelter system for single adults is more or less, and I think you heard Naz kind of touch upon this, with different focuses. So the Doe Fund is a great organization, and they have an extraordinary work program And their shelters are focused on individuals who are either looking for work or looking to improve their work situation, have a work history, or need to build one. We have a few like that as well at BRC, but we also have shelters for individuals who have severe and unsevere mental health challenges that don't necessarily rise to the level of hospitalization or institutionalization, but those are their needs. And so we orient around that. So we have psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners and art therapy. And there's a piece of art here that one of our clients left me to hang in the office. And we do that kind of work to help people who may not have completed their education. And most of the individuals in single adults in shelter have not completed a high school education, maybe have a GED, dropped out of school. So may not have the greatest command of language, but want to have an opportunity to communicate, express themselves, and be creative. And so these things are all provided voluntarily. We cannot say quid pro quo, participate in services or lose shelter. And in all honesty, I wouldn't want to. We use a technique called motivational interviewing, but basically the notion is we motivate. Because what we want is not people to do the things we want them to do, or else, our way or the subway, if you will, for people who clearly we all know will take the subway and live on the subway. But rather to say, we want you to invest in yourself. We want you to own your recovery, own your treatment, own, just as Naz did, that truly people, if motivated and given the services and the tools, don't need to be mandated to participate in services, but motivated so that when they leave, the things that we need to do, all of us need to do to live a better life, we do because we own that. Medication is a perfect example. We do not mandate medication at BRC. Some people might say you're crazy. People need it. They do. But if we mandated it and they took it not because they were invested in it, but because we were going to take something away they valued, a bed and a meal, then when they left, they'd stop. And we know that. So what all that effort and all that investment for naught, if when people leave and we're not there anymore, then they're not motivated. But if we can keep them with us, support them, help them see that medication isn't a goal, it's a tool to achieve your goal of a healthier life, of being a better parent, of being a better friend, of being somebody who can work, then that kind of strategy has proven through literature, research, analysis to be highly effective to achieve long-term goals. So that what we want, and I'll wrap up on this, is that when people leave shelter, they're leaving to something better. They're leaving to a job, they're leaving to home, they're leaving to stability, they're leaving to supportive housing, which is a model of housing for people who may not be able to work, but can manage the other challenges in their life on their own because they've been set on a good path, so that when they are there, they don't come back. BRC shelters have one of the lowest rates of people who, having left, ever experience homelessness again. And that, of course, is the goal. Like a hospital, a good shelter, an effective shelter, is a place of healing and transformation.
Thanks, Muzzy. So I want to, on the one hand, I want to push back only gently on the, or at least let's stress test a little bit the hospital analogy, but I want to do that to an end also, which is, so I think on the one hand that's a really, that's a very apt analogy. On the other hand, not necessarily at BRC, but elsewhere, we see that if emergency, congregate short-term shelters are designed to be really, sort of last stop emergency services, and through which people, then move along. I think that at least research would tell us that we see both in New York City and kind of nationwide, much longer stays, upwards with I think at least as a couple of years ago, average length of stays, above a year, things like that. Does that, like, on its face, that would suggest that there's, that there this that service is not filling exactly the function that a hospital fills. What do we make of that is sort of one question. You know, how do we think about the role of emergency, you know, the most effective role of emergency shelters sort of in a landscape of homelessness services, in reducing and responding to homelessness. And then maybe to tie in another thread, you know, I think, you know, Naz, you brought up, and maybe you can chime in at the end of this too, on the importance of housing. You know, when we know so much about the importance of access to, you know, affordable, quality housing. What should we do with, you know, we know that the difference that, for example, you know, access to housing vouchers and subsidies can make in, you know, in sustaining people's transitions, you know, into stable housing. What do we do with that information in a city with a very tight, or at least, you know, up until quite recently, a very tight, very expensive housing market? So just to put to, you know, how do we think about the dual roles of emergency shelters and affordable housing, maybe in light of what you just said, Muzzy? And I think we could talk about this for a long time. I don't think we need to, but I just wanted to get your take on that.
Well, I mean, briefly, you know, it's a supply and demand issue that has gotten aggravated, partly because of limited supplies of low-income housing, the housing that people can afford, because it requires an extraordinary amount of subsidy to make it affordable. It more or less costs the same to build the basic components of housing. There isn't a nonprofit low-income price for concrete or for land or for the labor of a carpenter or an electrician. The cost is the cost. Then, you know, some housing has some luxurious finishes. I hope for the real estate people here, I haven't, you know, kind of revealed a little secret. And then for people who are poor, even at a break-even rate, what people can afford, if you go by the basic rule of thumb that 30% of what you earn is what you should allocate to pay for your home, your abode. So somebody making, say, $20,000 a year, you know, roughly minimum wage, maybe not full time, should spend about $500 a month, $6,000 a year, 30% of 20, and that's, you're lucky if you can find a room without tenant protections, rental protections for that. And if your income isn't stable, you're out pretty quickly. And part of that's what's driving up the size of the shelter system, right? And so there's the math of supply and demand for housing, and then there's the math of throughput. That if average length of stay, as you note, Sophie, increases, if people stay twice as long as they were staying before because there's not enough places to exit to, then there's half as many beds available as there was, even if the number of people newly becoming homeless is static, is roughly the same amount coming in. There's just no place to go. Similarly, that concern of people leaving and coming back. And so that is, you're right, unlike a hospital, there isn't that same exit plan, although I can tell you how many individuals I've met who've been discharged from hospital, you know, and pull out their discharge papers and show them to me and say, you know, go home, refrigerate these medicines, refrigerate this, you know, penicillin. Well, I don't have a home, I don't have a refrigerator. Follow up with your doctor, I don't have a doctor, and get sicker. And so while they may be out of hospital, they probably should never have been. And then another, you know, little secret on our side of the world, and one that we are working with the city to address, is the number of people who should be discharged from a hospital, but there's no place for them to go, who are still too fragile to go to a shelter. There is a risk of them going to the street and are tying up hospital beds, not bringing in the revenue because they're not getting the level of care that a hospital bed should generate for a very acute need. They're really just using it as shelter. And so the hospital is losing money on that bed. And that hospital is a municipal hospital. And that is one of the reasons that the municipal hospital system is in deficit. And so we can reduce our need for shelter by creating housing. I think we're always going to need to have some shelter. But if we can reduce the amount of time people are in it because people are leaving when they're ready to leave, as Naz said, you know, there are many people ready to leave if only they could find a place they could afford. And so that is really, I think, the constraint, and maybe not a perfect analogy, but if people leave and then don't go to a place they can't afford, then they wind up coming back. And that's why we created the model that Steve talked about, that when we do our real estate panel, I'll come back and tell you the story of how we managed to pull that one off and create a subsidy that never existed before by using money we already had and spending it twice in a legal manner, and creating a subsidy out of thin air.
Fantastic. Naz, did you want to come in? I saw that you on mute.
No, I'm good. I just yeah, I just don't think people understand the amount of transitional house shelters. You called it emergency shelters, right? It's really transitional shelters. The need for transitional shelters because of the lack of affordable housing for people to exit into. And so until there's some kind of like balance of the two, where people can go from one point to the next. You know, our agency is like Muzzy, building more supportive housing than transitional programs right now because of the need of people, the communities, not only the graduates like from our shelter, but people in general just need affordable living arrangements that they don't exist. So,
but just following up on Naz's point, I think, all things being equal, there is some housing out there. And so going back to the service conversation we were having, we've looked again at data. We have an employment program, and I know the Doe Fund looks at it as well. So our employment program, we cost an average of $3,000 per client who participates voluntarily, but about 75% of the clients who should volunteer to do participate. It costs us about $3,000 for that incremental service of the employment services that we provide. And not for all participants, but only counting those participants who actually get employment, right? So I'm taking the cost of the program and I'm only distributing it not over the entire universe, but only the success. So it's actually making it a higher average cost. So I'm actually
So like the cost of a successful employment outcome,
right.
like the investment from your agency towards a successful employment outcome.
Right. Now, people who go through that program against the same universe and the same external environment of scarce housing still leave our shelters on average 135 days, or their stay in shelters 135 days shorter than the average of all other shelters in New York City. So the citywide average is X, call it a year, and BRC's average for those in that program is about a third of a year less, right? 135 days, about 4 months. So the cost to shelter that person that we are saving because they're leaving 4 months faster is saving $13,000, but also is creating a free bed that otherwise wouldn't exist and reducing the need to create more beds. And so we have the data, the city has the data of what are the strategies, be it around employment, be it around mental health treatment, addiction treatment, et cetera, that work, and which are the shelters that succeed, and where are they, so a BRC shelter costs more per day, but because as a result, people stay fewer days to success, the cost of what it takes to take care of that person and heal them is actually less on average, and they're less likely to come back. And so these are the kind of strategies, and these are the kind of metrics that we hold ourselves accountable to, that the Doe Fund does, that the city has all the data. And that is, I think, part of, if we're really going to move this conversation forward, not just of are there going to be shelters or aren't there going to be, and as touched on this, he stated shelters that just provided 3 hots and a cot cost a lot less. And then those that provided a robust array of services. Mm-hmm. And no surprise, probably, that where people are being treated with dignity and getting the services they need, they tend to see themselves with dignity and act with dignity in the neighborhood and in the community. Absolutely perfect, 100%, of course not. But relatively speaking, those are the directions we want to go. Sure. So we need to move from what is a system that's really about quantity in the end. Are we meeting that legal right to shelter? Are we giving everyone who needs a bed? To are we truly creating a system that is healing and transformative, that anyone who needs help is not only getting a bed, but getting help as well.
Thanks for that, Muzzy. Yeah. I want to circle back, and Naz, I want to bring you in here. We talked about our healthcare system and our hospital system, and the role that those institutions sometimes play in, discharging folks, sort of into subsequent homelessness kind of downstream. And I can think of another system, which is our criminal legal system, that often precedes homelessness, and from which people often leave without the without the support that they need, and sort of into and anyway, I'll stop pontificating on this. Naz, you is it the criminal justice program that you oversee at the Doe Fund? And I wanted to see if you could talk to us a little bit about what's important for all of us to understand about the relationship between homelessness and the criminal legal system, including maybe some of those reentry challenges, and anything else that comes up in your work.
Sure. So over the years, the Doe Fund has been collecting a lot of data, and what we found out was a lot of formerly incarcerated men were making their way into our shelter system, basically because they are unprepared when they leave or complete their time being served. They are given $40 in a bus ticket, and they're returned back to usually the borough or the city, which is New York, where they committed their crime. And so we decided that we would, based off statistics, that we would make a bridge back to life for them too. It's the same population. It's just to provide an opportunity for these men, which a lot of them weren't getting, simple things like coming out of jail with no identification other than the one that was given to them, trainings that they were, and jobs they were doing in prison, not being able to translate or use them out here. But meanwhile, they were running like a whole electrical department while they were inside, but none of those skills were transferring. So we try to cut some pathways for them through our programs and through our vocational pathways when they got out. And so we found that it was also, we're finding that it's also better for a lot of them, because they're not facing some of the obvious things that like I myself faced. They're not, most of them are clean for years. They're not battling substance abuse. They're just lacking a second chance, another opportunity. So that bridge that we're trying to create for them is kind of like so they don't recidivate back into the system, that they don't go back to the crime, that they don't go back to selling drugs. A lot of guys, if you ask them when they first come out, how was that experience for them? Most of them aren't going to say that was great. I can't wait to do it again. The first thing they're going to tell you is, I don't ever want to go back to jail. But if they don't have a plan, a good plan, one that they could talk about, one like work, work is real important. Like I said, that's our motto. If they don't have work to be able to take their kids out to the movies when they get home, if they don't have money, earned income to build their self-worth. So we thought that would be the same, that model will work even better for criminal justice than it has. And so what we developed is, I have about 200 men on parole here now. And you might think that's a bad thing, but it's actually pretty good. Guys take advantage of the opportunity. It's not as bad as people think. We help them manage their parole commitment, the conditions of their parole. And so it's even more successful. I don't know statistically exactly, but it's more successful than the guy coming off the street. Same services, we're delivering the same kind of soft skills building. A lot of guys have never interviewed for a job. Classes, we do on-site GED testing, and they have opportunity to take computer classes, whatever we we try to make available for them here on site, so they can go out and work all day long and come in. So it's been more successful, I think, than our regular Ready Will Enable program. Just off the fact that guys have had long periods of time to think about what they want to do with their lives once they get out, and we've made a vehicle for them now. The last 3 years I've been doing it, it's been pretty good. And parole is on site here at our facility, so the men have a better relationship with their parole officers. They don't have to go to the actual officer. Although COVID has upset a lot of things, even with that, COVID has caused a lot of barriers that we're jumping over to now. But
I
yeah.
want to come back to that in a second, and as I want to hear more about how COVID, and I know some of the folks who are here tonight too are interested in how COVID has affected a lot of the things that we've talked about just now, and the experiences people are having in the city. I want to, before we move on from the criminal justice system, the criminal justice program, Naz, to bring up. So you've talked about some of the really amazing successes that guys in your program have seen, which is extraordinary. I think, you know, we would be remiss not to mention that we know first that, you know, Black people, and particularly Black men, are arrested and convicted at really disproportionate rates, that that they serve longer sentences. And we also know that people of color, and particularly Black and Latinx people, are really overrepresented in the city's shelter system, with, I think, upwards of 80%, I think, of heads of households being Black and brown. And I wondered if you could talk about the the role of racism in the experience of homelessness in New York City, you know, as you see that with your clients and in your work.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is just my experience. I've been doing it a little over 20 years now. And the sad thing for me is the shelter system mirrors the prison system, almost statistically exactly the same. And, you know, 75% to 80% Blacks and 15% Hispanic and maybe 6% white or other, you know, but that's basically the same as the prison system. And that's my experience here. Even when I recruit people into it, it's the same ratio. It's unfortunate, but that's what we do. We're a country that incarcerates 3 times, you know, more than China and other European countries. We're just that. And unfortunately, it's the African American or the Black man that does get the brunt of it. So that's why I think it's so important to have this bridge for them, to have this criminal justice program, so they can have an opportunity not to go back to jail. If you can engage them, you know, earlier when I talked about delivery of services, if you can engage them at the point of release, like I said, reentry should really start from the time they first get their sentence. However, it doesn't. Reentry starts for a lot of them the day they're released from prison. Sometimes, like I said, just with $40 and a bus ticket. That's it. The guy's almost destined to go back, right? So if you could get them at that point, and that's why we started the criminal justice, at that point where you can give them a job, where they can begin to start feeling self-worth and self-esteem and start making some money, right? That's major. That's a major part. And then if you can add on some kinds of trainings and real opportunities for them, they will value it. You know, will people take the opportunity? Absolutely. You know, and so that's key for us. That's why we did it. But that's the lack of, you know, that's what we're doing. We're not delivering the services or providing the opportunities for people. Until we do that, they're going to go back. they're going to have to go back because they're not going to be able to work. They're going to go back to what they know, and then that makes it unsafe for us and everybody else that's out here living. And so it just makes sense for us to try to create more programs that will address those issues.
Thanks, Naz. I wanted to just on one to bring in just one more point in thinking about how past criminal justice involvement, which in our country and our city is deeply tied to race, affects access to housing, affects access to housing. Muzzy, could you talk a little bit about what kinds of formal or informal exclusion someone with a criminal record might face in their housing search in New York City?
Sure. So in addition to just the supply and demand conundrum I was talking about before, then even if you can find housing that you're eligible for financially, that you can afford, that you could otherwise apply for, your background, your history of incarceration, even though you've served your time and are following whatever rules, if you've been convicted of a felony. For example, our largest source of low-income housing in New York is public housing, New York City Housing Authority, which has its own blemishes and warts, no doubt. It's been underinvested in for a long time as the federal government has pulled out its subsidies. But it's still, there's a waiting list to get into it, a waiting list that's almost a generation long. So it's clearly the demand for it, warts and all, still is something that helps create affordability and stability in people's lives. That said, if someone is coming home from prison and wants to go back home to live with their support system, to live with their family, to live with their parents, to live with their spouse, to re-enter society as Naz has done and provide for their children, they can't. It's not allowed. And that is a rule that exists here in New York. And this may come as a shocker and has for an incredibly long time, that exceeds what the federal government requires, whether it was under President Obama or under President Trump. That restriction that New York places exceeds what Washington asks.
I think it's a more severe restriction.
It's a more severe, more stringent, higher bar, next to impossible if you've had a felony conviction to get in. Now, there is a pilot program being run to demonstrate that people can re-enter society and start a new chapter, being done by the Fortune Society, which is another wonderful organization in this town, and with a wonderful program on the Upper West Side, and in partnership with Trinity Church, another wonderful faith institution, coming together in these kind of community building to show, as Naz said, that we need to see the person and not just identify them by their past or by their label or by, which box they happen to have come out of. So I think we have opportunities to do better, and where the solution to each person or each family experiencing homelessness, because I'll say parenthetically, but emphatically, that homelessness is an experience. It's a situation. It is not defining. It shouldn't be defining of who a person is. So I'll never use the word homeless as a way to describe an individual, but rather their circumstances. But to the extent that we don't need to build a fresh new unit of housing for each person going through that experience, it's actually a good investment to bring families back together, for fathers to be fathers again, mothers to be mothers again, and spouses to be spouses again, and to pool their resources in this incredibly unaffordable for all of us city, to have two parents together parenting and supervising and financing a family. I'm sure many of us struggle to make that work right now. Imagine how much harder it would be if a loved one couldn't come home. So, it is a horrible reality, another dirty little secret of our progressive city, and hopefully one that will soon change.
And I'll add that one more the lawyer in me is compelled to point out that one more little secret about our progressive city is that NYCHA, both public housing rules and zoning laws tend to define family much more narrowly, actually, than lots of other kinds of programs and benefits. So the ability for making it, much harder for families, to say nothing of families with criminal justice involvement often, but to be able to kind of construct the living arrangements that we know work for so many different kinds of families. I want to, Muzzy, I'm glad that you mentioned the Fortune Society, which I will say, if, on the other end of the spectrum from what we might think of as imposing, unnecessarily severe restrictions, I'll say, as someone who has represented lots of people with past criminal justice involvement trying to get into housing, what the Fortune Society, which is another housing provider in the city, does, I think is quite extraordinary and almost unparalleled in that they don't draw, they make no formal across the board exclusions based on any particular conviction. They do very individualized looks at people's stories. They'll give a second look to someone, with a particular, I think in a few different categories of offenses, but they don't categorically exclude anyone in the housing that they provide. And they have, they're just a well of really, I think, extraordinary stories of transformation. And another, I thought it was apt for another reason, because we've had a few questions. I just think about the Fortune Society and how, they had a very long road to being, to being open in the beautiful building that they're in now. They faced lots of challenges. So I have a question for both of you. The Fortune Society, they face lots of challenges in opening, and now they're really beloved on their block, and I think it's up on 140th Street or thereabouts. But they host it's sad, I'm sure they won't be doing it this year, but they host an annual, on Halloween, neighborhood kids come to the Fortune Society and go trick-or-treating in a supportive housing complex, which is a beautiful story about what's possible. And we've had a few questions. I think folks are really eager to hear about what, hearkening back to what Shuli said about, this idea of what's a neighborhood and how can we, how can we embody this divinity, right? I think people are eager to hear about what are, we've had a couple of questions about what are the best things that individuals can do to address homelessness, and then also what are the roles of local organizations or residents in neighborhoods where shelters are located. So really, I think of this like body of questions as a chance for both of you to offer up some thoughts that we can leave with on what it means to be a neighbor, right? What it means to be a neighbor, in light of this discussion. Naz, do we want to, or, well, either way. Naz, why don't we start with you and then we'll ping back.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know what? For me, wherever we cited one of our shelters, it was important for us to be part of that community and be part of that neighborhood. So we would do anything, we wanted to make our doors open to them. So cleaning the area was real important. We wanted to show the neighborhood that we were good neighbors. And so security was important. There was no loitering in front of any of our buildings and stuff. We would talk to them and emphasize how important it was of perception versus reality, that if people perceive you that you have no purpose and you're not doing anything, then they'll think bad of you. So we always were always talking with the men about going to and fro and having a purpose and not loitering on the corners, not loitering in front of where you would live, just like you would in your own house. You come in. So, and then we would do special things to the neighborhood, anything from, like I said, open our doors to service NA meetings or NA meetings, anything that the community might a cleanup day, we would participate. They would do health fairs, and we would make sure that we would send a group of men to show that we were part of that neighborhood. And so we slowly turned the people in that area away from not wanting us there to wanting us. We always understood how important it was wherever we cited one of our facilities to be good neighbors, to make sure that we kept the people feeling safe, and that we knew that our men were there for the right reasons. They weren't there to, create more crime and problems in the neighborhood. They were there just to live there like them. And so it's important that you outreach and that you develop those types of relationships with your neighbors. I don't know any other way. I know that was always first things first. Even when I went to Philadelphia, I remember spending maybe first 6 months going down there every day to talk to the community boards and the community and the neighborhood that we were going into, to assure them that they did not have to worry about. And then you have the safety or their concerns, and listening to them, and then making sure that our men responded to. So.
And as you talk about doing these things, you talk about making these outreach efforts, these investments, and I'm curious about the I guess what I want to ask too is, what did the how did a neighborhood show the residents that they were wanted there? Is there a time, is there an example of an outreach effort by some other organization, some other resident, something like that stood out to you, or that meant something to you as a service provider? I'm interested in this back and forth, I'm interested in that back and forth, and sort of what it looked like for you to not only sort of make yourselves welcome, but to be welcomed. Yeah. Do you have any stories that come to mind there? Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry, Naz.
Yeah. So for me, from not wanting, I think there's this example. It happens gradually. We offered meals to some seniors. You gradually see people when they have a problem, they actually run into your site for help now. I couldn't say that was the way it was when we were first there, but they see us as a resource. They see us as a place where they can run from safety or having trouble out. So those were just obvious things that happened. So it's over a period of time. After they see you in the neighborhood and you develop those relationships and you outreach them, you can see there's just examples of people that happen. It just happens. It happens over years. It doesn't happen right away. I mean, our sites are still there and still good neighbors, but I'm just saying it doesn't happen gradually. People have to see, are you going to deliver what you said you're going to deliver? Are the men going to be respectful? Are the men going to be good neighbors? If they are, then it's easy, for them to seek things for you, whether it's, toys for tots, or, I can name a lot of things we've done with the community, but it happens over years. It didn't happen right away. People were very skeptical when they hear, of a shelter moving into their neighborhoods. They're not really like that happy, and until they see that the men have purpose. Like I said, once that happens, it handles itself, really.
Yeah. Muzzy, did you have anything you wanted to add on this?
Yeah,
and then I think we'll pivot to talking about the pandemic a little bit.
Sure, but I think this, in some ways, it ties in, and then gets exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. And so, our philosophy very much in line with what Naz was describing, but easier to say than to do, to be frank and to be honest. Not that we don't strive for it or have a good neighbor policy, but particularly because we work with individuals, which is really the bulk of the single adult system, sadly now, who have mental health challenges and addictive disorders, that the ability to have those conversations and reinforce them to the point that they take hold is very hard to do when someone may not be sober all the time or may be living with a mental health challenge. I would ask, not for show of hands, but ask people to just, if you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, Russell Crowe, the Hollywood version of the John Nash Nobel Prize winning Princeton economist story. It's a great movie. So I won't spoil it entire. Well, yeah, spoiler alerts. Sorry.
All right, if you haven't seen A Beautiful Mind, you can just mute Muzzy for a second.
Right. Yeah, if you can. I don't know if you can. And so, we watch the first half of the movie and we believe everything that we're seeing that he's experiencing. Ed Harris. Who doesn't want to believe Ed Harris is real? Who doesn't want to believe at any point in life, that Ed Harris is real? Or that wonderful roommate, or the little girl.
We need to make this more accessible to people who haven't seen A Beautiful Mind.
Well, I'm going to finish. I'm going to get there. They're not. They're delusions of his mind that he responds to and reacts to as if they are. So I'm going to give you two stories of the challenge of these quality of life issues that exist in communities throughout the city, where there is homelessness, which is throughout the city, whether it is sheltered homelessness or unsheltered homelessness. And these are stories that happened here at our building in Chelsea, where we were not welcomed with open arms by and large. There were some who were tolerant and others who were worried and concerned, and that is par for the course. And I don't judge people for having something show up that they're not that familiar with, but wonderfully we figured it out. So we have one client who I get emails with some frequency from people, though less than it used to be, because he litters. There's garbage cans on the corner. Why can't he, like everybody else, put that cup of coffee that he got from the bodega, when he's done with it, just put it in the garbage can? What is so difficult about doing that? Why does he always throw it in the gutter? Does he not respect us? Does he not value this community? We would never litter in front of your building, Muzzy. Why are your clients littering in front of ours? So that individual, I won't tell you who he is, so I'm not breaching his confidence, is living in an altered reality, believes that the government that he knows and sees every day comes by and collects the garbage will be able to better control and possess him if his cup is in the garbage. And so what would be completely irrational to so many is completely rational to him. Another story, a different client I see in the lobby, I know he is a chronic user of the shelter system, is struggling to find his stability, and we are having a conversation. And he is asking me about whether or not these are certain things he should be doing, and I suggest that they might not be in his best interest, whatever they are. Leave here, go out and do something, we'll just call it stupid. And he says, okay, I hear you, but the voice I'm hearing over here, and he points to the other side, is saying I should. And I said, all right, well, what do you think about that? He's like, well, I hear that voice a lot, and it always tells me to do things that you're suggesting I shouldn't be doing. And I don't think I should be doing these things, but this voice keeps telling me. I think I should go see my doctor and have my medication changed. So great insight, great progress, and again, great challenge. The last story is a story about a client of ours. I was sent a YouTube video. You can find it, it's for real. It's called the BRC Urinator. And our neighbor takes a picture of an individual who walks into the service vestibule of the building where there's a security camera and looks around and then pees in the corner, and you can see the dribble as it kind of trails out through the vestibule. individual then leaves the building and heads up the block as if going to our shelter. We look at our videos, and in fact, at about the same time, we see someone of a similar shape entering the building. So thank you for the video. Let me look into it. We're always responsive, right? So to Naz's point, the point of having dialogue and having engagement and having someone to talk to is so important, to express, this is what's happening. What can you do about this? So we spoke to that client, and initially the individual denied that this was him. And then he said, well, actually it was me. I had to go. And we were like, but you were just 50 yards away. He says, I've been having this problem, and all week I haven't been able to control my bladder, and I've soiled all my pants, and people are making fun of me. And it was my last clean pair of pants. And I just didn't know what to do. I wasn't gonna make it. And I know I shouldn't have done it. I know I was trained, I was brought up well not to do those things. It's an older gentleman. And we said, okay, well, let's understand why this is happening. Let's get you down to the clinic, because we have a primary care clinic here, and run some tests and get an x-ray, get you over to the hospital and get an x-ray. So he had a growth, and thankfully we were able to get him, or he was able to get an operation. And until he did, we got him diapers. But had it not been for a neighbor, maybe frustrated and angry, but nonetheless willing to communicate with us and tell us this is happening, we might never have been able to intervene soon enough to have made a difference. So we need to a point I think Sophie was making before, we need not to just look at the behavior that any of us would in a normal matter find offensive, but we need to look at it in context to understand the person, the situation, the moment, and also distinguish between those who are living sheltered and the struggles and challenges and hopes they have, and those living unsheltered. To recognize that right now in the pandemic, as we may or may not know, the city has pretty much locked all the public bathrooms in the parks, in the subways. And so a lot of people who are living unsheltered, who are resourceful and resilient and strategic, and even know how to use a Starbucks, except you can't go to bathroom at Starbucks anymore, have few options if they have no place to call home.
Thanks for that, Muzzy. I think these stories are so useful in illustrating, I think, how little we can, often discern about someone's private struggles. So thank you for that. We're very close to our wrap-up time. I just want to end with one quick, Naz, to pivot back to something very quickly that you mentioned about some of the new challenges of your work, or the new challenges that your clients are facing during COVID, just because I know a lot of the audience is interested in how this pandemic is affecting what you do. So I think maybe we can I'm hoping you can speak to that, and then we can turn it back over to our great organizers.
So the challenges for us is we've actually had developed this really good culinary track that our men are able to go through, because the food the industry is what they call felony friendly, and so they were able to get jobs, entry-level jobs, into a lot of the restaurants and different food industry jobs, which took a big hit the last 7 months. Guys that had jobs in that industry got laid off, and so we've run into a little brick wall there with the COVA. The other thing, of course, when guys lose work and lose employment, they lose their housing. First thing they do is lose housing, and so they will what they call return to shelter, because when they exit out of this shelter, it's like a year from the time they leave. that they're able to come back to the same official shelter. So therefore, we're starting to see a rise in that too. No employment, lose housing, even though there's not supposed to be any evictions or anything. Most of these guys are not in those type of settings. They're either in furnished rooms or things like that, where landlords are doing unethical things, locking them out of their apartments and kind of like just doing what they want to do. So we've seen a rise in that on, those couple of issues that we're fighting, employment and housing has negatively impact us here. And I'm sure at other shelters too. It has to. Like I said, it has to.
And I just thought I'd jump in real quickly on the hotel challenge too. So we've moved, de-densified 6 of our shelters into hotels across the city, in Herald Square, in downtown Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, Chinatown, and lots of places. And again, it has been a challenge. Our clients, as all of us do, seek social living, and we have said, you can't. It is stay in your room, stay in your room, stay in your room. Meals that used to be that we used to dine in a cafeteria and sleep together in dormitory spaces and do art therapy groups and all those other things. Those things aren't happening. Meals are being served, grab and go, eat in your room. Do your outpatient treatment telehealth from your room. Talk to your case manager telehealth through a camera. And so the only place that people can be social, and I have the same experience with my kids at college, the only place that they can be with their friends is to be outdoors. And so unlike pre-COVID, when shelters may not have been their presence as significantly felt in the community because they had dining rooms and they had group rooms and they had lounges and you could watch the football game on Sunday. Here we have a pub across the street that has televisions faced out onto the street. No surprise, our clients are going to watch the football game next to the tables where the patrons are, because where else are they going to watch the Jets and Giants lose again? And so that has been an incredible challenge for us. The notion of isolation to fight a pandemic is effective, but what it does for somebody with mental health challenges and addictions can be debilitating. And so we have to find the balance of doing that. And that has not been easy. Not easy for us, not easy for our clients, and clearly not easy in the communities we are. But it is done out, by and large, out of people's desire to just live as close to the way they lived before when they can't do that in a hotel.
Thanks, Muzzy, and thank you both. Thanks, Muzzy and Naz. I will now turn it over to Rabbi Lauren Cabell Herman to close us out, I believe. Wonderful.
Just as I hear a child.
Good.
So thank you so much. I want to do 3 quick things and appreciate everyone who's stayed on this long and been here for our whole program. Let me just pin my video. Okay. First, we want to thank Sophie and Muzzy and Naz for their sharing tonight and for their insights, for the history and the experience. I want to thank the sponsors, which are BJ, SAJ, Romamu, Base Manhattan, Anshe Chesed, Kehilat Re'im HaHuvim, Jewish Center, Joseph Stern Center for Social Responsibility at the JCC, and Darche Noam. As Shuli said earlier, a amazing coming together of the Jewish community in a way that the pandemic enables us to come together in new ways. And I want to especially thank Rabbi Shuli Passau, who really did a lot of the legwork in getting the speakers and getting everything together tonight. The second thing I want to do is just to name and say that it's locked because I'm in a program. You need to ask Daddy. Okay, is that that what happened tonight and what is happening in all of the conversations of late in the Upper West Side is that when you talk about homelessness, you realize that it's not about homelessness only. There are so many issues that spool around and are byproducts of or manifestations of or reflections of. So when we're talking about homelessness, we're also talking about affordable housing in New York City. We're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about incarceration. We're talking about COVID in particular right now. We're talking about mental health and mental illness and access to healthcare and access to services. And all of those things are part of a system. So homelessness is not something we can really address in isolation. We have to look at all of those conversations and all of those systems. And I know that we are committed to having more conversations like this, and that we hope this is a beginning and not an end to us exploring these issues together as a community. So please stay tuned for more programming that will be coming. I also want to acknowledge that the gap between, all we heard and all that is, so daunting and versus where we are, and what do we do with that information of like how broken everything is and how difficult the situation is and who we are as individuals and what we can do. And I want to bring us back to what Naz said at the beginning and was reiterated in many, many ways throughout this evening, is when you treat a person like a human being, they start to want to participate in life, right, as a human being. And the way that we treat people has a profound impact, has an impact on the way they see themselves and as whole, as people filled with potential, as possibility for a second chance. And just the way that you spoke just now or just recently about people's background stories of like when we see something that seems inappropriate, instead of maybe, launching into a tirade or a generalization or a stereotype, what if we paused and really just looked and looked for that humanity? And argue that is a fundamental Jewish value, is to seek out and see the B'Tselem Elohim, the spark of the divine, the humanity in each and every soul that we encounter, even if that's challenging, even if it's difficult. So I want to just honor that that is a way that we can bridge that gap and we can get into action, is to simply, begin by smiling at people and greeting people on the street. And, if you don't want to give a person money for the homeless, a person who's experiencing homelessness money, perhaps you could just smile and acknowledge their presence and treat people with that kind of dignified humanity. This is a complex issue, but we look forward to digging into these difficult conversations together as a community and learning and moving forward together for the betterment of our neighborhood and for our city overall. So I want to wish everyone a good night. Thank you again to the speakers and to the sponsors and everyone who's here. So thank you. I think with that, people are going to sign off. Have a good night, and please, stay safe